introduce, and by way of introducing myself, if we just go on to the next slide. So my name's Stephanie Davies, for those of you who don't know me. I know some of you who are on this, and I'm just giving you a little wave. We've got people in as far as Fife, hello Alan, and as low as Kent, so it's nice to see the whole of the UK here. So my name's Stephanie, and I'm the founder and director of Laughology. I give myself the title of Head of Happiness. It was a title I made up. It's not something that was on the school list at school. But just to give you a little bit of my background. So my background is in stand-up comedy. That's how I started over 22 years ago now. And then I went into psychology a few years later. So that's my background. And just to get us warmed up a little bit, you'll see on the bottom of this presentation, you'll see some numbers here. So just to get us warmed up, what I'm going to ask you is to tell me, how do these numbers relate to my life? So we'll go with number 2 first. Why do you think number 2 relates to my life? Just pop it in the chat box, and we do have some prizes to give away for people who are winning. It's got children, it's not children. Marriages, thanks Julia, but it's not that. 2 birthdays, 2 marathons, 2 dogs, cats. No, not that. 2 degrees from where? 2 sisters, not that. 2 jobs. I can't do the one at the moment. I do have 2 eyes. That's a really good one. Good shout out there. No one's got it yet. 2 hearts. 2 years in comedy. I had 10 years in comedy. No one's got it yet. We do have a curly whirly prize. We have a squidgy man prize. We have a pen and a book and our key rings to give away today. No one's got it as yet, so I will tell you. 2 parrots, love that, Pam. I'll tell you what it is. I was suspended from school twice as a kid. I was expelled once. I'm from Liverpool originally, so that's quite a mean feat. So I was twice suspended from school. No one's got that as yet. I was a bit of a rebel, actually, Sarah. And someone said, join the club there. So number 3, how does that relate to my life? Number 3, how does that relate to my life? Okay, 3 kids, not no kids stuff. Handbags, way more than that, Robin. Siblings, Danielle, you win. So Danielle, you're going to get a curly whirly and a key ring. So you win there. Number 4, how does that relate to my life? Number 4, how does that relate? 4 GCSEs. I wish I had 4, Chris. I didn't have that. 4 husbands. I can't handle 1. Couldn't do 4. 4 kids. No. I just look tired today. 4 pets. Hair colours. For someone, I think someone might have got it yet. So 4 years. Laughology is 10 years old. I've actually, I'll give you a clue, it's relating to my husband. I'll give you a clue, is anyone going to get it? Married for 4 years. Seema, you get the prize. So Seema, you're going to get a pen and a little Laughology USB. Make sure you email me when I shout out your name. 30. If anyone says husbands here, I'll be a little bit worried. What's 30 age? Oh, I love you, Fiona. Angela, love you too. It's not my age, not the age I got married. It's none of 30 kids. Someone just thought I've got 30 kids. Probably look a little bit rough today. When house number, Denise, well done, is my house number. Denise, you're going to get a squidgy person, okay? So I'll send you a squidgy person. Last one, Mandy, I've got way more than 42 age. Look at you all. Who got that first? We'll send you a prize out. So brilliant. 42 answers to the life of the universe and everything. Chris, I'm just going to give you a prize for that because that's a brilliant one. So make sure you get a prize today. If I shout you out, you will get a prize. And make sure you email me. The big prize, which is the Laughology book, I will give that away a couple of times, but you've got to work really hard on that. So the reason why I did that is because we all have assumptions about people. And the assumptions that we make about people can impact on the way we treat them, positive and negatively. And sometimes, because we can't see mental health, we make the assumption that, did I win the age, Amy King? You did, you can have that. Make sure you drop me an email. Sometimes we make the assumption that people are okay and they're not. sometimes we make this assumption that they're not okay, and they are. So the more that we can find out about people, the better. So we're going to go on to our next slide, and these are a couple of quizzes where we're going to do a myth or fact. So you can put in the chat box again whether it's myth or fact. So is it a myth or fact that depressed people don't have a sense of humour? Brilliant, everyone's getting onto that. You're absolutely right, it is a myth. Depressed people do have a sense of humour and they can laugh. And so when we meet someone with depression, and they might have told us that they suffer with that, it doesn't mean that we treat them differently. So don't make assumptions about it. Lots of comedians, it's quite well known that comedians and people who are performers generally, there's a higher level of people committing suicide in that kind of field. I've done some research on that, but I'm not going to talk about it now. Robin Williams, yeah, really sad. So let's go to, that is a myth, on our next slide. So let's go to our, so brilliant, yeah. So depression is sadness that doesn't go away. It can cause loss of self-confidence and self-esteem as well. And we all can get depressed at certain times. I think that's important to remember. But when it doesn't go away and it's over a long period of time and it's impacting on the things that you do, that's when we need to think about it differently, and we need to help people and be super aware of that. And I think at the moment we have to be really heightened and aware about people's mental health. So it's when it's over a long period of time. Let's go on to our next slide. So, is it myth or fact? Everyone's got a bit of OCD. Is it myth or is it fact? We've got quite a few facts or truths here. We've got a myth there from, I just missed that one, Lorna myth, few facts, cat myth. It is actually, if we go to our next slide, it is actually a myth. And it's one of the things that people talk about a lot, or she's got a bit of OCD, or he's got a bit of OCD, when actually the reality is, if we just go to our next slide, OCD, which stands for obsessive compulsive disorder, it's a form of anxiety, and it's something that comes with anxiety. And OCD can stop you from doing things. So people say, I might have a bit of OCD, or you've got a bit of OCD because you do that. But OCD is when something is a compulsion, you can't stop doing that thing, and it can negatively impact on your life. Mandy, you're absolutely right. People say everyone's got a little bit of autism, or there's a huge spectrum. I can't remember his name's brother, or is it his dad? Sacha Baron Cohen's dad, who talks about that quite a lot as well. And the BBC, yeah, they did a brilliant radio show on it. So it is about not minimising the term. Everyone has quirks. Steph, you beat me to it. And it is about recognising that we are all different in different ways. That doesn't necessarily mean that we should be sided or looked at differently. And when we are different and we include people, then it's less likely to impact on their mental health if they are different. Okay, so let's go to our next slide as well. So not judging people just because of their quirks is really, really important. I found when I was dyslexic at school, and I didn't know I was dyslexic, it had a huge impact on my well-being because people treated me differently. Okay, some truths already coming in there from a C. Sammy, brilliant, absolutely, Exy. If we go to the next slide. You're right that it is fact that we do. I've lost, just lost my place. Yeah, anxiety causes physical and mental symptoms. So just let's have a look at some of these on our next slide, because identifying these are really, really important. So some of the symptoms that we might have, psychological or physical, and sometimes when we have the physical symptoms, it can be quite frightening for us as well. And so that we don't realise that this is a symptom of anxiety because we might not feel anxious psychologically. So the two don't always go together. And this is important to recognise in ourselves and in other people as well. It can absolutely cause stomach issues as well, Paula. It can impact on the way we eat, all those things. So it's important to remember that we've got the physical and psychological. And if we're having these over a period of time, again, that's when we need to think about it. So if we just go to the next slide, just to think about stress and anxiety a little bit more. It's when we have a feeling of unease or worry. It might be mild or severe. And when I talk about stress and anxiety, we can all have a little bit of stress and anxiety. It's important to remember that a little bit is okay. It's about whether it passes or not. At the moment, we've probably got quite a low level of anxiety and stress consistently. And this is why we're going to have to be super careful when we get people back to work, when we get people back to school, that we really look out for and look after people, because when it persists over a period of time and stops you doing things, that's when we need to think about it differently. The good news is we can absolutely learn to manage stress and anxiety, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well as we go through. Okay, so brilliant. Everyone's been joining in on some of those points. So if we go to the next slide, one of the things that I want to talk to you about is what I call the mental health continuum. That we all have a variety of optimal mental health all the way through to minimum mental health or maximum mental illness. And there are things that can bring it on. So especially at the moment, we can move around this. So when we talk about optimal mental health and minimum mental illness, and if you just look at this diagram, it's a nice way to think about it. That's kind of a person who has high levels of well-being and who's thriving at life and doesn't really have any mental illness. I think where we're going to be and where we have to be careful is that we're going to move around this mental health continuum as we start to release lockdown. So it's super important that we start to think about how we can support people. The next one is minimum mental health and minimal mental well-being. So it's an example maybe of a person who they have not really any diagnosable mental illness or ill mental health. However, their mental well-being is suffering. And I think that's where we're going to slip. And we have already started to slip with people. If we go around again, we've got maximum mental illness and minimum mental health. And this is the challenging point. And then up again, maximum mental illness and optimal mental well-being. When a person experiences a high level of well-being, although they might have diagnosed mental illness, and that's super important to remember, because we can have ill mental health, but we can help ourselves and generally feel well as we go through the days, but then we can have episodes as well. So how do we deal with this? So I'm just going to ask us to go to the next slide. And this is a simple technique that we call at Laughology. Going back a minute. So one of the things that we've got to remember is the way we think has an impact on our well-being. And a really good way to bring it to life, this is what we call the basic CBT model. And every situation creates a thought process, which creates a feeling and an action. In that thought process, and I've talked to people about this before, we generally are thinking based on thoughts that we've had before. So in life, we're reacting to something that has happened previously in our life. So our beliefs, values, and memories tend to be projected onto what's going on, which is why we deal with situations in a different way. Amy's just talked about pattern matching, absolutely. So we look for patterns in the way that we do things and think, and we match them in the real world that we live in. The biggest challenge that we've got now is we don't really have anything to anchor what's going on in the world at the moment with past experiences. And this can send us a little bit into the unknown. And what causes us to have anxiety or stress or long term is unknown, is when we feel that we haven't got control over something. And when we haven't got anything to anchor or match on, that's when we can revert to stress or we can revert to anxiety. However, the good news is we can learn to manage our thoughts and to help other people. So I'm going to take you through some of those techniques now. So a good way to think about this is what we call the 4 S's, if we go on to our next slide. And that is spot, stop, support, and signpost. And I'm going to go through them super quickly because of time. But what we do have is we do have longer term courses that you can log on to, especially as we're getting people back to work and back to school. We've got a programme called Mind the Gap, Back to Work, and a programme called Mind the Gap, Back to School that you can book on. And they're 2 90-minute sessions where we can get into this stuff a little bit more for you as well and give you some techniques. So how do we, first of all, how do we spot? Just put in the chat box for me. What are the things that we might be looking out for in ourselves or other people that might give us a signal that people are struggling a bit? Physical signs, change of behaviour, absolutely, withdrawal, Helen, feeling more tired, isolating yourself, wonky thoughts, someone's been on this session before, low moods. So I'm just going to call out a few there. So Chris, absolutely withdrawn, not interested. Paula, snappy, yeah, that's something. And I must admit myself, I can get a little bit snappy, especially when I'm tired. So if we just go on to the next slide, all the things that you've just mentioned there are absolutely right. So we talk about that fight mode, that flight mode, what we call flock and freeze. Joanne's talked there about increasing hot flushes. It can have a physical impact on us as well, loss of appetite there as well. So we know what fight is, we know what flight is. Flock is sometimes one that people don't know as well. And this is one that we need to be careful of, and especially as we're bringing people back into work and back into school, what might happen is people find other people who think like them. And this is really unhelpful for our thinking because it creates this loop where people just feed back to each other. So let me give you an example of it. So what might happen is I might have had an argument with my husband and I might phone one of my best friends. Say I might phone Maxine, Bill Pin Jones, and I might phone Maxine and I might say to Maxine, I've had an argument with hubby and he's been a right pain in the ass. He's done this, he's done that. And Maxine says to me, oh, he's a real bastard. And I say, oh, Maxine, I'm so pleased I spoke to you. You just confirmed everything I thought. And then we phone our lovely friend Mary Rose Neville. And Mary comes on the call, because we do 3-way calls, because we're dead technical like that and cool. And Mary comes on the call and goes, actually, have you thought about it like this? But I private message Maxine and I go, let's not invite Mary Rose again. And so what we do is we just go to people who feed back to us. And this is an important one to recognise. And how do we break that up in a positive way and intervene with more positive thinking to help people to be better in their behaviours? The other things to look out for, we just move on to the next slide that you've all talked about, and I'm not going to mention them all, but some of the stuff that you've talked about, let's say that sense of feeling overwhelmed, socially withdrew, some people talked about. Stephanie says the F, which is faffing, I like that. So also losing your temper quickly. Now, it's really important to spot in yourself when these things are happening and to just recognise, am I a little bit tired? What is going on here? With children, what the really important thing to do is to help them recognise their own emotions and to call them out. Emojis are a good way with children to help them to think about emotions, and we are going to run a mental health awareness for children as well. So if we go on to the next slide, the next part after spot is to stop, and that's for yourself or with somebody else. So what I mean by stop is just kind of sitting down and just reviewing what's going on. So if we go to the next slide, one of the good questions to ask yourself is, what's going on. So once I've spotted, I'm aware and I've identified what's going on here, and I've named my emotion, and naming them is really, really important. And when I talk about naming them, I'm not saying, oh, this is Ian, or this is Bob, but naming that emotion, because when we stop and we can recognize that emotion, it helps us recognize what we're doing rather than react. So sometimes when I am tired or I've got lots going on, I have to recognize that my head is full, otherwise I can snap. So that's recognizing what I need to do, which is to take a step back and take some time out rather than reacting, which sometimes is going overboard and snapping at people as well. So recognize your emotional triggers and spot and stop them. So recognize versus react. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. And one of the things that is super important, like I've just talked about, is learning to challenge and reframe your anxious thoughts. People have talked about good to start identifying emotions with really small children. It absolutely is. So a good thing to do is what I call the 3 N's. So notice it. So that's the first thing. What's going on? Notice it's there. Name it. So call it out for what it is and neutralize it. And that means talking back to it as well. So when we talk about notice it as well, there's another step to this that we can do. We just go on to the next slide. And that's noticing what kind of thought it is. Someone mentioned this before, so you mentioned wonky thoughts before. Who was that? Because you're going to get a prize. You can get the Laughology book for mentioning wonky thoughts. So wonky thoughts are what we call catastrophizing or common cognitive errors in psychology. But I like to call them wonky thoughts. And actually recognizing some of your wonky thoughts are important. I'm not going to mention them all, but some of the ones to call out here are catastrophizing or jumping to conclusions. So if you don't notice them in yourself, Colleen, that's a really good point. So practicing this will really help you notice them in yourself. At the end of the day, what I'd recommend for people is to grab a thought journal. So if there are any thoughts that you had or any reactions that you had in that day, have a go at writing them down. So what was the thought and what was the reaction? And was that thought helpful or unhelpful? If it was unhelpful and caused a bit of a reaction, can you identify it relating to one of these? And we'll make sure that you get all the visuals after this as well. Another helpful top tip might be, if we go to the next visual, and again, we'll bring this more to life when we do the longer session, is what I call the tier model. So recognizing the thought, and this will be a good one to have a go with, Colleen, and using your thought journals. It's recognize that thought. What is the emotion attached to that? And what is that causing you to act like? And therefore, what is that doing in terms of creating a reality? So I'll just give you a little bit of an example of this. So like I said, when I was at school, I was dyslexic. I didn't know that. So my thought process was, I'm thick, and I'm not as clever as all my friends, and I'm no good. So that was my thought process. I'm no good. The emotions were that I was upset, I'd be embarrassed, I didn't want to speak out and read things out. So instead, my actions would be I'd be really naughty and be sent out of class. That supported the reality that I'm no good at stuff because I was out of class so much I didn't learn. Therefore, it supported the thought process bit. So when I got a bit older and I learned all this stuff, I looked at what would be more helpful thought. And a more helpful thought, what would it be? Give me a hand here, folks. What would be a more helpful thought rather than thinking I'm thick, I don't know how to do this, or I'm not as clever as my other friends? Don't know yet. The wonderful word of yet. Yeah, I'm special. I can get help. Positive. I need help. Yeah, I'm just different. Brilliant. Calvin, you get a prize for that. I love that one. And that's what I learned in the end. And now I consider my thought process and my dyslexia a superpower because I'm no good at big words, so I use words like wonky instead of common cognitive errors. I love Ushi. Ushi, I love that. You're going to get a prize as well. Ushi, you're going to get a book because I always talk about I am a weirdo and I love being a weirdo as well. So brilliant. All those stuff. I wish you were all there with me at school to help me. So the next part is support. And super important, how do we support people? So if we just go on to the next slide, I talk about, everyone knows me, knows I love an acronym. This is what I call ALE support. So how do we ask, listen and empathise? There is a really big difference between listening and empathetic listening. So if someone listens to you, if you say, do you know what, I don't feel great today, I've had a bad day, and I can't be doing all this lockdown stuff. And then the person listening says, oh, I feel the same, it's bloody awful, isn't it? You're starting to put your own thoughts on it. Empathising is just about listening. You don't have to give advice, brilliant Kerry, listening without advice, or talk about yourself. You don't have to reinforce their message, brilliant Catherine, and it is about letting them speak freely. Elizabeth, brilliant name, you get a prize, so make sure you email me afterwards. And really important, don't judge or criticise. So we ask open questions. Let's go on to our next slide, asking open questions. We're nearly done. And I've mentioned this one before on the next slide, which is learning to control your thinking. So your coping skills on the next slide, brilliant. Oh, brilliant, thanks Matt. That circle of control. And again, you can use this at the end of the day. If your thinking was a bit wonky and you had that reactive focus and started looking at all the things that are out of your control, have a go at bringing it back into your control. The more we practice these things, the better we get at them. We can also do this with somebody else. We've gone on to the next slide, which is perfect timing. I always talk about check-ins. If you are part of a team, how do you have a check-in with somebody? Super important. So it might be in school that you have a big board and you can put things up, or if you're in part of a team in work, there's certain systems that allow you to check in with people. And just asking them as a team, even to say, how are you? Is it a 1, not so great, or is it a 5? And if you're getting lots of ticks around the 1 in your team, you know that you need to do a little bit of work. Same in school. If there's certain people who are replying to you and you know, and they've said to you, I'm feeling like a 1 today, again, you know that you need to pick up with them if they're doing that regularly. But when we use numbers, it's a lot better for people to express how they feel as well. So using numbers is always helpful. So 1 not being okay and 5 being okay, or the other way around. But numbers can be helpful for people. And then the other part, as you know, I'm passionate about humour and laughter. So making sure that we get those positive neurotransmitters in, if we just go to the next slide. And different ways that we can do that. I always talk to people about find the things that make you laugh. What are the things that make you laugh? Or what are the things that make you feel better? So just in the chat box, very quickly, add for me, what are the things that make you laugh? What are the things that make you feel better? Dogs, guineas, yeah, children, brilliant. And just thinking about these, but making space for laughter is super, super important. It gets these positive neurotransmitters up, which are so important: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And let me tell you, at the moment, it's okay to laugh. People are often asking me. So if we go on to the next slide, some of the important things is about how do we then signpost things like the Samaritans, things like Mind, in our workplace and in schools or organisations. Where can we signpost people, perhaps if they don't ask? And if I'm just going to put up a very quick poll for you just now, so Matt's just going to put that up for me now, just before we end the session. I just want you to tell me, how long do the majority of people with a mental health problem wait before they tell their closest families and friends? Just let me know how long do you think that people do. So what you'll need to do is just press and click and then submit. So you'll just need to press and click and then submit and let us know. So how are we getting on there, Matt, with those?
Yeah, 70% have voted so far, and keeping on going. If you can't see, just type in the chat window. It's either 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, or 1 year.
Chris has said this is expect that they just don't, Fran? They said 1 year. Okay, have we got some answers there, Matt?
So over 80% of the people have voted, and 53% have said it takes 1 year, 38% 6 months, and 8% 3 months.
So well done to those ones who've said a year. So in a survey, we know that it's a year. So that's why it's really important to spot, because people don't recognise in themselves, and it's about kind conversations and making sure, and sometimes absolutely even longer than a year. So finally, I always like to finish on a positive. So 5 important questions you can ask yourself or other people every single day. So how are you feeling, or how am I feeling? What's taking up most of my headspace at the moment? What's keeping me awake at night? Who can help me with that? Who or what? Am I tired? And what is the thing that will bring me some joy today? So if you can just help to ask these questions and spot, stop, support and signpost, we will help people get back to work and get back to school in a mentally healthy way. And if they are experiencing mental health, it's how can we help them and not judge. So what next on the final slide? Your what next is think about what can you do to support mental health. What posters or visuals can you put about, and how can you connect and check in with some people? What if someone doesn't want help, Lucy? That's a really important point. We can't make people, but all we can do is be there for them and speak to them and let them know that we care. So we can't force people to get help, but we can let them know that we care. So we do have a longer programme of this, the Mind the Gap for schools and the Mind the Gap for workplaces. We'll send you the information on that if you do want it. Do get in touch with us at Learn with Laughology on our Twitter feed and on our LinkedIn feed as well. Thank you very much, everyone. We just go to our final slide off, and I just wanted to say a big thank you to Vicky, who works in the office at Laughology, and another Steph W, who works in the office, who are all amazing for helping this happen, and the wonderful Matt, who's our tech support as well. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Be safe. Look after yourselves and look after each other. We'll make sure the recording's ready and some of the resources for later on this afternoon. Take care, guys.